invade the Americas, going to invade the Aztecs. And so he was the one that led the invasion of the black nation that was there, that we now call Aztec. But he was writing what he saw. These were not really letters. They were narratives of what he saw and what was going on, and what they were doing as well. But he was writing about the mosque that he saw. He was writing about the barber shops that he saw, how fine these barbers were. And he was talking about the Moorish dress that they wore. The clothing was Moorish, and the buildings were Moorish in architecture. And when he crossed on the top of the mountain to invade the land, to come down to this capital of the Aztecs, he was at the top of the mountain. He looked down and he made this strange remark. He says, "And there lies far-flung Venus." That doesn't mean very much to many people, but it meant a lot to me. I was familiar with Venus over on that side of the ocean and that city sitting on that water, and I knew what he was saying. Here was a city built on canals with ships all around it, and it's this African city there with the Moorish architecture built on the design of a Venus. And later I understood that's exactly what it was. He started describing the city. Here's this marvelous African city sitting on a man-made island in a man-made sea where Mexico City stands right now. And you've got this black man. If you've ever seen this piece of art called the Moorish Chief, I'm going to tell you right now, they said they don't know who that man is modeled after. But when you understand the descriptions of Moctezuma, this African that they call Moctezuma, you will see that Moorish chief and you will be looking exactly at Moctezuma. He is fitting every description that they gave, and then he has this little secret thing about it. When you look on his head, you see he's got this white cowl on his head, and underneath that white cowl is a little small red cap. Now, they'll try to say that's about the assassins or the assassins. No, you got to understand, Mexico is Lower Egypt. That's where Memphis was, and when you're the king of Memphis, your crown is red. And I'm thinking they're trying to show him secretly that this is Moctezuma. They said Moctezuma is this medium-built man, and they talked about the beard that he has that's shaped, and they're talking about he's black, and then others say very dark-complected. And I'm looking at the Moorish chief, and I'm not seeing anything that does not agree with the descriptions that they give of Moctezuma. And I'm saying, well, now we got a problem. Aztecs are Indians. That's what I was told. But now I've got Martha Malaku's education under my belt, and in the book of Ivan Van Sertima, he talks about those two expeditions, those two voyages of ships that came out of Senegambia. He's talking about those 500 ships and those 2,000 ships that went across in 1306 and again in 1311 looking for the first group of ships, or about those years. Now, we have those ships coming across the Atlantic from West Africa, and then they say there is no record of what happened to them, except now I'm in the Americas. I'm at Mexico. I'm looking in the records that the friars put together when they talked to these Africans there whose histories were being destroyed as soon as they took over that land. They were just burning them in the street, piling up the books. And yet here is this friar, here's this Bernardino Sahagún who's come in and he's earned their trust, and they said, well, we got a couple of books they didn't get. And so he's recreating the histories that Spain and the church thought they had destroyed. And so he's rewriting them all over again. And he's showing these Aztecs as blacks with African features. And now it gets a little better, because he's also talking about the conversation that Moctezuma had with Cortez. And now here is Cortez also putting in his journal the conversation he had with Moctezuma. And here's Castillo. He's putting in the conversation that Cortez had with Montezuma, and here are these other writers, and they're putting in this conversation that Montezuma is having with Cortez. And I thought it was unbelievable that Montezuma is sitting right there, this black African in this Moorish clothing with this little red cap on, because he's really the king of Memphis. And he's sitting there and he says, well, you know, my father and my grandfathers say that we are not of this land. He said very clearly to Cortez, we are strangers here. We come across that sea in ships, and we landed at the city of Panuco, right south of Texas, and we came in, and people really didn't want to have much to do with us, but we found out how to work politics, and we started making some alliances, and before they knew it, we had become the most powerful group, and now we are the powerful group. And then we came and we found this island and built our capital on it in 1325 A.D. Now, we have 500 ships and then 2,000 ships leaving out of West Africa. In 1306, 1311, they're crossing the Atlantic. Nobody knows what happened to them. And here the Aztecs are saying, and we arrived about that same time in our ships coming from over there where the sun rise, and we came in, and now they're being painted in their books as blacks, as Africans. And so the white scholars who then got control started explaining things, and they started saying things like, well, you know, when they came in, they started looking for the symbol of a cactus with an eagle standing on the cactus clutching a serpent in his claw. I wish I could tell you what that really was, but that's not the truth. These Africans already knew that other, and now they were looking for that other West African nation called Memphis. And the symbol of Memphis was because Upper Egypt, the eagle, had defeated the Lower Egypt, which was the symbol of the serpent, and Dan was the serpent, like the Dan people in West Africa. And so the symbol of the United Kingdom was this serpent being held in the claw of this eagle. And they knew at Memphis that symbol would be there. And when they found that island with those columns broke down and with these symbols of Egypt on it, they knew where they were. And they started rebuilding Memphis, the capital city that they now call Tenochtitlan. The Aztec capital actually is an African capital built on the top of ancient Memphis, the other West African capital that was built there in Mexico. So here we go. So now we have the understanding that Martha Malaku had given me from Ivan Van Sertima's book about these ships coming over. Now we've got Hernan Cortez's letters talking about the conversation with Montezuma, saying, and we arrived in these ships, not across the Pacific from the Orient, as so many professors try to tell you now. He said we came across that one, where the sun rises. We came from that direction and came over. Well, Asia's not over there. Africa is over there. So now we have these Africans coming in. Now, here's the deal. Hernando Cortez stops by the Yucatan Peninsula before he comes in, and he picks up a woman to help translate so he can know the secret language and know what they're going to do, and she's going to interpret it for him. Poor sister tore up the African nations with what she did, but she did it for a reason. They had expelled her from this city some years before, took her from grace, disgraced her, and now she wanted revenge. And so they recruited her, and she came in, and she was telling them everything they were saying secretly that they thought Cortez and these Spaniards could not understand. But they kept calling this woman Marina. But really, they were also calling her Malinche. And it wasn't until I got another piece of understanding that was coming out of West Africa that says when you talk about Mandinka, the Fulani called them Malinche. They were calling this woman Mandinka the entire time. Malinche. Malinche, what they say. Malinche, do this. She's a Mandinka. She has come from Mexico City, where these other Africans were building their capital city on that island. So now we have Fulani in the area, we have Mandinka in the area, we have the book showing them as blacks and with African features. We have Moctezuma saying we arrived in ships coming from across the Atlantic. And we came in the 1300s and built this capital in 1325, just a few years after those ships left out of West Africa. Oh, we have Africans now. And then it got very, very nice when I found these forbidden histories that they wrote, that the Bernardino Sahagún put back together, that they had destroyed, and then they confiscated these records and kept them in a monastery for about 300 years, hid them, and finally they came back out. But he had recreated the histories of the Americas. And here this friar was writing what these Africans were telling them about the history, and they said, well, you have to understand that even the Olmecs, when they came over, you know, they came with this pharaoh, and they call him Naharka, but we know Taharka's name when we hear it, even if they change the T to an N. There's Naharka, is Taharka, and he's dead, and he's coming to be buried in this area. But they said that the man that's leading this expedition is the African whose name is Meshi, M-E-C-I. And now we have the meaning of Mexico, because they were first called after this African, the land of Meshi, and the land of is, of course, Ko and Ka and Ta and those kinds of terms. And so Mexico, Meshi's land became Mexico, and now we say Mexico. It's named after that African, Meshi. And there it was in the records that this friar, Bernardino Sahagún, had assembled. That's why they were called the Forbidden Histories. Blacks were never to know these again. So now we're in Mexico. We have that part. But then the Aztecs say, with all these pyramids there in the nearby great city, right here beside us, we don't know who built those, and I want to know who they were. Well, I've got the West Africans in, but now we've got some pyramids that's looking a lot like Egypt. So I went and asked Egypt. I started checking their records to ask them, do y'all know anything about the Americas? Have you written anything? I mean, if you build a city like Heliopolis in the Americas, I figure you're going to write about it. And they did. And I saw so much in those records. One of the first things I saw were the writings that said, you know what, and we would go to this great pyramid, and we would ascend the double staircase and receive our crown as pharaoh. Well, the Great Pyramid on the Nile in Northeast Africa doesn't have stair steps going up it. It doesn't have temples on top of its summits. They could not go and break through the boat on the temples atop those great pyramids. There are none there. And that was the clue that Egypt was writing about the Americas.